This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
Well, welcome to another episode of Grafted Together. I know you're used to me doing a monologue at the beginning, but our guest today, Noah Brink, who I'll introduce here shortly, he is no stranger to ACSI. He actually joined us a couple of years ago for the launch of our spiritual formation principles, and God is doing amazing work, and we'll have an opportunity to hear about that. But before I introduce Noah, I want to remind you that if you are not a part of the Spiritual Formation Network, you are missing out on an opportunity to connect with leaders around the world who are attempting every day to walk out those 4 principles that we launched 2 years ago. So coming up on April 28th, we'll have Dr. Milton Gonzalez, Executive Director at Covenant Christian Academy in McAllen, Texas, who will join us to walk us through the last phase of the spiritual formation journey map on how to equip teachers and leaders in preparing for and responding to crisis. So to register for the Spiritual Formation Network meeting, you can sign up at acsi.org/convene. That is acsi.org/convene, and look for the Spiritual Formation Network tab. Also, be sure to register for the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit occurring on June 15th through the 17th in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in conjunction with the Colson Center, where we will explore the theme of biblical anthropology. And you can sign up today at acsi.org/rooted. Again, that is acsi.org/rooted. Well, our guest today, Noah Brink, has been immersed in Christian education his entire life. He grew up at a Christian school in Memphis, Tennessee, where his father served as a Bible teacher. He went on to attend Wheaton College for his undergraduate studies and has spent the past 23 years serving in a wide range of roles within Christian schools, and currently serves as the head of school at Franklin Christian School in Franklin, Tennessee. In 2023, Noah founded Renew Education, a nonprofit organization devoted to advancing Christ's kingdom by helping schools align more deeply with the gospel. That same year, he published his first book, Jesus Above School, and launched the RenewCast podcast on Christian education, and began coaching and speaking through the Herzog Foundation. Noah is an avid sports fan who also loves the outdoors and books, especially anything by C.S. Lewis or his favorite author, G.K. Chesterton. He holds graduate degrees from Reformed Theological Seminary and a master's in education leadership from Covenant College. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Jerry, what an absolute honor it is to be here. So good to be reconnected with you. And even as I look back, I'm not even sure how the Lord connected us. We just sort of found each other, and what a blessing that's been to be with each other in person and across states over these previous years. It truly is an honor to be able to speak with you and all of the listeners today here from the south side of the Nashville area.
Well, I think I do remember. It was I was at a seaside event in Oregon, and I got connected. Oh Lord, help me. I see his face and I'm not remembering his name. He's like, "Have you heard of Noah Brink?" I was like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "You've got to get connected."
That's probably
with
Weston Kurtz. I think it was Weston that connected us.
It was Weston who connected us. That's exactly right. Because I remember Weston was he was working on a profile for a spiritual life director. And so this is right around that time where we were beginning the process of building our spiritual formation network, really gaining a lot of traction around it. And so he brought up your name, we got connected, and I remember we had an opportunity to sit down over breakfast at First Watch in St. Louis. Man, I came to your hometown, so we got a chance to connect there. But your name has come up, and your book has come up with leaders that I've spoke to over the last couple of years. And I just remember some of our conversations. One of the conversations that I remember us talking about trade education, which I feel like that's another conversation where I want to dig into a little bit more with you, as I think it's an important one. I just saw a podcast recently, just a little clip with Mike Rowe, who's doing a lot of work in that particular area. So I thought about you again, even in anticipation of our podcast today. But hey, listen, man, 2 years has been a long time. And, at that point in time, you were not ahead of school. You were, I believe you were full on doing some consulting, continue to expand what you were doing, what you started with Renew Education, but kind of bring us up to speed on how you, what's happened the last couple of years leading into you being the head of school at Franklin.
Well, there's a lot of different ways I could answer that, Jerry. The consulting work for me continues to be a great joy, and I'm thankful to be able to work with school leaders through the Herzog Foundation. That primarily is the way that I'm still connecting with different school leaders. And my heart is for the Christian schooling movement. That's why I care about ACSI. I care about these organizations that are trying to advance the kingdom through Christian education. So that has not diminished in the least, but one of the things that also I think was driving me up the wall, even in that, is I would work with schools, and there's part of me that would get jealous, saying, "You're getting to tackle these problems that we're working on together, and I don't get to get my hands dirty. I just get to be sort of the guy on the side that's, equipping you with tools and whatever else to get your fingers dirty and to get into the mess yourself." And my heart is in the day-to-day of the Christian school. I deeply love it. My wife and I, even she knew that, like she could see that it was driving me crazy. And in God's providence, this school and I started talking probably a little more than a year and a half ago. And I think what drew me down here, and I'm originally from Tennessee, so being back in Tennessee is a homecoming in many ways. But one of the things that most drew me to this school, FCA, Franklin is a town south of Nashville, very entrepreneurial town, a lot of Christian artists, Christian ministries. You think about it like the traditional Christian music industry. It's not, when people talk about it being centered in Nashville, you could almost argue that Franklin within Nashville is where a lot of that is. So the artists, the dreamers, the thinkers, a lot of scholars, entrepreneurial. So that was part of the draw. I think what also really drew me down here is I've not seen many boards that are willing to be disciplined when it comes to enrollment.
Interesting.
Our enrollment is driven more by what our facility can sustain or what our community can sustain. It's typically not driven by a philosophy of what our educational model is. And so Franklin is growing like much of the Nashville area. This school has grown a lot in the past few years, and yet the board was pretty adamant to say that we are not going to pursue being a mega Christian school, which I've been in those schools. I think they have a place. But in my own journey, as I am a product of these kind of schools, I've worked in these schools, and then as a consultant, I'm seeing all those things. What I started learning about myself too, and I actually have a podcast episode where I say this, that if I were ever to start a school from scratch and put my own fingerprints on what I think would fit me and what I would love to see God do through a school, I would love to be in a school where we have roughly 50 to 60 kids a grade. And I said that 3 years ago. I didn't say it. FCA was not on my radar. I wasn't saying it to try to court FCA. And that's actually who we are. We're a school of around 60 students a class. We're at capacity. We could grow. The market would allow us to, but I think it's important for schools to know who they are and then behave like it.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of schools, they don't know who they are. And so for me, it was so desirable to be in a school where there really is a knowledge of self and a desire to stay true to that. Now, obviously, but I'm also replacing the founder, which I know that is there's a huge challenge there.
Yeah.
And so, but also the other great beauty of it too is my dad's a teacher. I got to ride to school with my dad. To me, that's the good life. And part of my hope and desire, reason why I want to get back into it, is I wanted to go to school with my kids. So all three of my children are here at FCA. I get to wear FCA pullovers and shirts and polos, and my kids are wearing the same thing. And it's just an absolute joy for the life of the Brink family to be
Yeah.
intricately connected with the life of a Christian school.
How much did your time, let's say, out of the typical loop of a Christian school, influence your you've articulated it some, but I'd love to draw it out a little bit more. This period of time, what else was going on in your mind? What else was going on in your heart that where you saw God kind of growing you even into the position here at Franklin?
Well, I think so, when you're in a school, you're facing the tyranny of the urgent. You have to focus on your school, whether you're a teacher or an administrator. You have to deal with what's right in front of you.
Hmm.
By stepping out into the consultant and somewhat, I would almost say like a think tank kind of space,
Hmm.
I started getting connected with people that were asking some questions. Jerry,
Hmm.
one of the things that I'm convinced of, and I actually am working on an episode myself that I'm calling the counter revolution of Christian education.
Hmm.
Because, and I'm not calling it the revolution because the revolution happened in the Garden of Eden when humanity rebelled
Hmm.
against God.
Yeah.
We have to do a lot of work to go back to the way education was supposed to be. And
Hmm.
frankly, we are still doing school not that differently ever since we started doing on the heels of the Industrial Revolution.
Absolutely.
I think by getting exposed to other schools, it got me outside of my own context a bit. Well, not a
Hmm.
bit, but a lot. And I started asking questions and seeing things. I started seeing the real challenges in front of us, and it made me I would say, much more acutely aware of. And I'm willing to say it. I think we're in a crisis moment now.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill says, "Don't ever let a good crisis go to waste." So I'm not pessimistic about it. I'm optimistic about it.
Right.
But I do think that, and the board, when they hired me, they knew what they're getting. They could have listened to me on my podcast. They could have read my book. They know the sorts of things I was thinking
Mhm.
already. But getting to noodle through these things with other school leaders and try to fix things, it made me just that much more insistent. We
Mhm.
have to solve this, and we have to solve it now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely see in your story that God was certainly helping bring clarity of thought. Yeah, just released your book when we met.
Mhm.
It was grateful to get a copy of it and read through that myself. Definitely saw the immediate alignment with some of the work that we were doing together, just really trying to answer those tough questions. But I can definitely see you stepping away, helping to provide that clarity for what God was calling you to do, and the fact that you had some clarity on the type of school that you would I definitely see where it seems to me that God was really kind of honoring what it is that you're trying to do, and now he's giving you an opportunity to really kind of work out what it is that you've had in your mind for in your heart for a long time.
Very much so. Very much so. And even the book itself, like, I don't know if I would have been able to just hunker down
Mm,
and grind that thing out if I was doing the day to day of school leadership.
mm.
For instance, I mean, the volume of books I'm reading is part of it is, this being my first year at FCA, the volume of books I'm reading has just radically decreased.
Tyranny of the urgent.
And that's part of it. Like, I had more capacity. I was on the planes more and I was traveling more and I in hotel rooms and I'm reading books and, in ways, and my wife and I talk about this. We feel called here, and I don't use that lightly. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
Presbyterian. We're the frozen chosen. We're very careful with our theology and words, and I don't. We tend to not over spiritualize things. I feel very, very profoundly called here,
Mm,
and in some ways, you look at throughout Scripture. Often, when there's a calling, there's also a season of preparation prior to that calling.
yeah, yeah.
And so, and the seasons were not easy. And so
Mm,
I look at, some ways it's helped me to lead a little bit with a limp.
Mm,
using Dan Allender's phrase.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just truly a blessing to be able to be in the role I'm in.
So let's talk about the book here, Jesus Above School. Um, we were talking, just before we hit record on the podcast about that. You said it's not a book for everybody, but let's talk. Let's go. What is the book about? What prompted you to write the book, and what's your hope that people get out of the book? So those three things.
Yeah, so the book is primarily a book. I mean, I wrote it in mind with the goal. I envisioned that this would be a book that a faculty and a school that was willing, like they were willing to be intentional about, let's get better. I wrote
Hmm.
the book in mind. I could imagine that this would be a book where like a school would divide their faculty in reading groups and they would take a chapter at a time and read through that. I mean, that really was. I wrote it with a professional development sort of framework in mind.
Hmm.
Um, so that's sort of what the book about, and specifically trying to give teachers tools. I don't provide lessons. I don't say, here's how you teach a U.S. history lesson from a Christian worldview. Of course, I mean, I've taught lots of things. I make references. I've interviewed people along the way to try to figure out what they do. And so I give examples, but it's not a book intended to merely say, here's what you do, go do this.
Yeah.
It was more designed to provide a structure of questions and things to think about. So, regardless of
Hmm.
what you teach, uh, to be able to have a consistent language. And part of what was driving this, and I noticed this in my work, if you have, let's say you have 65 teachers on campus, and you walked around and you asked those teachers, give me your definition of a Christian worldview, or give me your definition of biblical integration, or
Hmm.
what a Christian education means,
Hmm.
you're going to have 65 different definitions.
Absolutely.
We have not done the hard work of providing a common vocabulary. I mean,
Mm,
we hire people that are people of faith. We hire people that we hope have the ability to do it. But frankly, even in our Christian colleges, and this is another one of my sort of soapboxes that I've gotten on the more I've interviewed people and talked to people, even our Christian colleges are not preparing their graduates for Christian education.
yeah.
In their schools of education, many of them, they're preparing them to be able to get licensure.
Yeah. In the
And
public
I understand
square,
why
kind
they
of.
do that.
Yeah.
I get it. But as a result, even if they're a Christian and they've come from a Christian school, we can't assume that they understand what Christian education is. And for me, and I said this to you earlier, I got to the point where I said, I'm going to stop blaming teachers for not knowing how to teach Christianly. They
Hmm.
don't have the tools, and our schools are not adequately equipping them to know what it is and what it's not.
Yeah.
So that's really what prompted it. It really was a desire to give teachers a framework, to not to at least give them a place to start. Now it's heady. I
Hmm.
don't, and it's way too long. I think if I were to rewrite it, republish it, it would be 60% of what it is now. But I also I'm a teacher. I understand the challenges of teachers. I'm also a school leader. It really was a desire, like you got to get your theology right. You have to understand
Hmm.
the big questions. You can't
Yes.
just sprinkle Jesus dust on an otherwise secular education.
Yeah.
You've got to think. And the
Hmm.
goal was to give teachers some categories and frameworks to help them think Christianly. My next book, by the way, that I'm working on, it's my pace of finishing it has slowed down, is entitled Gospel Above Grades, and it gets down into the weeds a lot more.
Hmm.
So Jesus Above School was more like let's just imagine what would it look like to say that Jesus is primary above everything else we're doing. So it's
Yeah.
it's a it's a
Uh-huh.
posture.
Yeah.
We need to get into like what, so then what would that mean for our report cards? What would that mean for our athletic departments? And so it gets
Hmm.
much more, and there's still day-to-day stuff referenced in the book itself. But this next book is like, assuming you've read the previous one, let's now really get some dirt underneath our fingernails.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's really good. What I really appreciate what you just said, and I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier, but you mentioned the whole idea of posture. So, when I think of that, I'm thinking of Colossians 1:15 through 20, where Paul ends that he ends that passage. I call it an argument. He's like, so that Christ may be preeminent in all things. And knowing that you came from Covenant College, I mean, it's kind of
That's their
Covenant College.
motto.
It's
Yeah.
like that's their motto. I mean, you drive up the mountain and it's right there.
Yeah.
So but you also reference that we're still operating off of a model that's been influenced by the Industrial Revolution. It's interesting that I would say my experience through my time at ACSI, or even when I led a school, it was almost like when I engage with leaders or teachers, it was like they didn't really understand the waters that they were swimming in. They didn't understand. If I can go a little bit step further, that we were really kind of caught in this 150 years, 175 years, depending on how you look at it, riptide that we've been drifting for a very, very long time. And there's a very few people that are kind of emerging and say, you're drifting. And they're just like, oh, no, no, we're fine. We're good. You're drifting. Oh, no, no, you're
Yeah.
fine. We're good. So from your vantage point, can you unpack just really quickly this whole idea that we're still operating off of an industrial model of education, and in order for us to have an authentic Christian education, it requires for us, and this is what I'm hearing you saying, what I understand about your book, for us to return to what has worked in our history when we consider the scope of what genuine Christian education has produced.
Yeah. I mean, this is right. This is a lot of the work and the thinking I'm doing, and even what we're talking about here at FCA. And I'm saying this, and I know it's audacious, Jerry. I'm okay with audacious. Our stated but unwritten vision here at FCA is to become the epicenter of the change Christian education needs around the world.
Mm,
And I mean
mm,
it. We are
mm,
willing to begin to enter into a space where we're asking questions that are going to cause significant change here.
mm,
Um, Historically, I mean, the inventors of the school, the universitas, the Greeks, it was always about character formation. It was about shaping for a life of virtue. Now, their life of virtue was influenced by their religion and the polytheistic, but there was a transcendence that guided what virtue is. It was impossible to separate the two. And even through the medieval ages, there still was an understanding. The whole reason for school is to be godly, to be rightly aligned. That was the whole
mm,
purpose. You don't go to school just to learn things. You go to
mm.
school to be aligned to the character and nature of God. Like that was the goal.
It's
The
catechesis,
Industrial
right?
Revolution,
Yeah.
what's that?
I said catechesis is it's being
Yes,
formed. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, the catechisms were birthed out of that. Like, and
Yeah.
in today's world, I say, so, hey, there's this thing called the Westminster Catechism or the Heidelberg Catechism, and people look at me like,
What
I
is
don't even know
that?
what that is. It shows you something that we don't catechize. We don't, and actually we're scared of indoctrination.
Right.
Uh, and yet our kids are being indoctrinated by an algorithm and by a culture
Hmm.
that is forming them. But
Hmm.
the Industrial Revolution changed things radically where it became not about character formation, but it was about acquisition of knowledge or skills in order to achieve a utilitarian purpose. And I know
Right.
there's a lot of philosophical words there, but in one way or another, what we're saying is that rather than filling a bucket, it became about checking a box.
Hmm.
And historically, it was about to fill someone, to help them to live a life that is true and beautiful and good because of, and I'm not a classical educator, but the classical
Hmm.
educators talk that way because that's what it was.
Right.
And we became more about like, here's this thing you need to do, you need to have so that you can be in the workforce. And in our context, we don't think a whole lot about the workforce. We think more about college.
Hmm.
And even practically speaking, we all know this. We got rid of things like shop class and home ec because we say you don't need them for college. We've built our program around what you need for college. I mean, look at my resume. I'm a huge fan of college. I've spent a lot of time in higher ed. I'm not opposed to college. But
Mhm.
we become consumed with all of these things that we say that's what school is supposed to be. And I'm like, but that definition or that assumption of what school is, it's not shaped from a posture of how does this help us love God more? And one of the
Mhm.
questions I keep asking in our school is, but is it best for kids? And what's fascinating is the school, which should be first and foremost for kids, hardly ever asks that question. We simply just say, but that's what school is. And what I'm asking is, but why? Why not do what's best for kids? I mean, formation, discipleship, anything you look at in those languages, you will, those terms, you cannot find a book about those that doesn't talk about the need for time, the
Mhm.
need to slow down, the need for solitude, the need for relationship. That is
Mhm.
antithetical to the way we think about school. School is a mad dash from start to finish with 4 or 5 minute passing periods. I mean, the whole system is affected by you've got to get all this stuff, get all this stuff, get all this stuff, get all this stuff, and no one's actually saying, but why?
But no, if I can play devil's advocate, Noah,
Yeah.
I can hear the parent saying, or let me take an example from a board member or a teacher. I can hear the board member saying, well, you know, how are we going to fill the seats if our grades are not up to par, if our kids aren't getting into certain colleges? I mean, that's it, you know. That's why people come to our schools is because our rigor in our academics, and they want to see what our SAT, our ACT scores are. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah. So on some level, I mean, this is where I start getting a little bit more cheeky of sorts. You know, we have these schools where we talk about rigor and we talk about excellence, and I'm like, but where are most of our graduates going? They're not going to elite colleges. I mean, let's be honest here. You know, you see these schools where parents are spending $20,000 a year for tuition, and the kid goes to the local SEC or Big 12 college or community college or state school that you didn't have to have an elite education in order to go to. I mean,
Mhm.
it's kind of like there's this assumption that, oh, we gotta do all these things so they can go to these elite colleges. Well, very few of now we have a student this year that, I mean, she's looking at Vanderbilt and Notre Dame, which I'm love it. Let's do it. You know, if they go to a Wheaton college, if they go to some like that sing, my heart sings. Like I love that.
Mhm.
But the purpose of our school is not to get kids into college, it's to prepare them for their calling.
Mhm.
Now, they calling could involve college, and I think that our schools, we need to create paths for those students that college is a part of it, that we need to prepare them even better. I think because we've tried to um, do the same for every single person, that we've even minimized our capacity to prepare kids that should be on a college track.
Mhm.
90-second little even like reflection on this. Historically, we used to track kids in our country
Yeah.
where kids would
Mhm.
get done out of middle school from the little one-room schoolhouse, and we would say this is more a university kid, this is more of a agricultural kid, this is more,
Yeah.
we stopped doing that because you look at the Red Scare, you look at McCarthyism, we see all the things that the communist countries were doing where they were taking kids away from their home because they're going to be a physicist or a gymnast or whatever else. We took them from their home because we forced them into a track in communist
Mhm.
countries. We got
Yeah.
scared over that. We said, we're not going to do that anymore because we have to pursue the American dream. So we're going to do the same for every single one. Now, here's what's ironic about it. In order to not be communist, we're going to do the same thing for everyone.
Oh man, that's a mouthful, man.
And you can actually historically look at it where we stopped doing that, where we said, well, every kid needs the exact same education. That's coming from a highly utilitarian. It's not looking at what is best for a kid. And God does not make mistakes. If a
Right.
child is the sort that when he gets in front of a diesel engine, he comes alive,
Yeah.
why would we not push the kid in that direction? Now, we want our kids to be prepared. I still want kids to know who Bill Shakespeare is. He's really important. But if a student is the sort that should go to a law school, then we need to give them the tools. The other thing too, and I would push on this with our families, I think that there's underneath us, we're not swimming upstream as much as some would say when I'm pressing on this, because we're
Mhm.
all terrified about what AI is doing to the workforce.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, some schools, some elite secondary schools are actually starting to bring back trades
Right,
because
right.
they know that those will weather the test of time. I'm
Absolutely.
interested in it not just for those purposes. I'm saying a theology has to drive our decisions.
Right.
I'm pressing on these very questions not because I'm trying to make sure our kids have jobs. I'm trying to do it because I want to honor God. Now,
Mhm.
surprise, surprise, it aligns with what we're also saying our kids need. Our parents are
Mhm.
starting to wonder, uh, maybe if my kid follows that typical track I did, that job won't be there. And we know this. You go into a trade, you're going to find a job really
Yeah,
quickly.
and that really, I referenced Mike Rowe at the beginning. Yeah, he's the clip that I saw where he said he's really trying to equip student. I forget the number, but his foundation has invested a significant amount in what he's called AI proof jobs, and then he lists
Yes.
them. Plumbers, welders, uh, shipbuilders, things like that that he perceives that, and he's right that AI will not be able to do, at least not yet.
Yeah.
You know?
But most of those trade schools, though, they're driven by unions,
Mhm.
which I think our unions. There's a reason why we have them, and originally the purpose of those was to honor the dignity of the worker, which is a good thing. But I think that Christians, God's people, need to start saying we need to start preparing kids for these because our
Mhm.
kids need a theology of work. They need
Yeah.
a theology that is saying, how does the Christian seek cultural renewal? What does it do
Mhm.
to a society when God's people go into it and make things better? Like that's
Mhm.
the mission of the gospel. And wherever the church has gone historically, they started schools and they started hospitals
Yeah.
and they started churches because they said it's a whole person. Like, and so for us at our school, we're trying to say maybe we need to slow down. Maybe we need to add more passing minutes between our classes so our kids can breathe. Maybe,
Mhm.
it's like, how about we change the assumptions of what we think school is?
Yeah.
Discipleship and apprenticeship are the exact same word in the New Testament.
Right, right.
Maybe apprenticeship should be more of our educational model, considering that's how Jesus taught.
Yeah, it's more of what I've called it's the factory approach. Like we're just pumping out widgets. It's like pass, 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 fail, pass, pass, pass,
Right.
fail, and then
Yeah.
all the fail parts go to Ross and Marshalls. The women listening to it would really understand that. And
Yeah.
it's
Well,
the
yeah.
off market, brands, and
Yeah.
they're not going to the and yeah, and where I think what Jesus modeled for us was more of gardening. It was more cultivation. It was a recognition that you're not going to prune every tree in the same place, and each plant in the garden, they need a special type of attention. But it
hmm
creates an ecosystem when all of those things are doing their part within
Yep.
that particular garden, rather than the factory approach.
Absolutely. I mean, I use that exact phrase in a series of Holy Week meditations I wrote for our community. I mean, God is the gardener God. You see him walking in
Mhm.
his garden at the
Right,
dawn of creation and at the dawn of the new creation. He's walking in the
right.
garden on Easter. That's where
Yeah,
we see him.
that's good.
The
That's
two
good.
images of creation, the first creation and the new creation. And in both instances, God's walking in his garden. And I think that we need to take those images and say, God delights in this idea of growing and caring for creation. And what would it look like for our schools to be gardens, which takes time? You look at things according to seasons. You're willing to say, what does a kid need? I mean, so like you're looking at milestones. I think kids need milestones where
Hmm.
we put in front of them like these different stages, and we need to be willing to just say, I understand that this is what we all think school is. We typically think of school the way we experienced it.
Yeah.
But most of us, I mean, and here's where when parents, you ask, it's a great question. When parents press on me, what do they say? I'm like, well, let me ask you this question. How did you learn most everything you know and use today?
Hmm.
They'll tell
Hmm.
me, I learned by actually doing it.
Yeah.
Like that's how I learned it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so what's interesting is we know as a society that generally speaking, we learn embodied. We learn head, heart, and hand. We know that, like we know that. And yet
Mm-hmm.
we continue to run after school as though it's all about enduring a lesson.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was having this conversation with my son actually this morning. I One of the exercises that I do with my family on an annual basis. We've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years. My oldest is 20 now, where I actually have them write out what I call a lifestyle desires alignment assessment, and it's basically 10 questions. Um, that I ask my kids on a regular basis. In fact, let me grab my phone. I'll list out those 10 questions. And 'cause I'm pretty sure folks are gonna ask, Jerry, where'd you get those 10 questions from? Can you send those to me? So I had my son redo it because it's his senior year, and I'm wanting to do somewhat of a recalibration with him to take a snapshot of where he is. So it starts out with part one, which is it's a question, but it's a statement to complete. It says, I want to be remembered for. And so it's that begin with the end in mind question. And then question number 10 ends with, how will the accomplishments of these goals advance God's kingdom? So I asked them a series of goal related questions in between. And so in between, I asked a question, if money and time were not an option, what three things would you spend the rest of your life doing? So really trying to get to the heart of the matter. Before I die, I would like to accomplish the following. I'm really good at, I struggle with, and then it asks questions more goal oriented. What are three things you can do this year to reach one of your goals? So just really trying to get them in the mind of strategic thinking. One of the things that my son wrote that was really, really fascinating, and I really did not expect it, but it was one of those aha moments. He wrote in the area of I'm really good at, and this was number three. He said sports and work that required manual labor. That's what my son, and so we had, when I saw that, again, my kids had been really writing these things out year over year, but that was the first time, he's 18, that he's articulated it that way. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm so glad you came to that revelation because I've known that about you for a very, very long time. But I really wanted you to come to that realization yourself, and you did. And so I said, here's who you need to call, and you need to call them. You have their number. Go and call them now. And I said, when you get out, and if this is God's will, because we're still praying through it, I said, but you can go and work right now. And I believe that organization that you will work for, they will train you and you would have a great career
Mhm.
because I've seen what they've done with other people who've come right out of high school.
Yeah, I know that this was not the original intent of our conversation with this path we've gone down, but I mean, it is critical stuff. And, you know, we've done some vision work here at our school. And one of the phrases that we've built into our vision is that we want kids to know themselves deeply.
Hmm.
Education is not designed the way we do education today. Even the classical schools, the Christian classical schools that talk about, it's almost entirely the life of the mind. It's like
Hmm.
they're doing a lot of education, but it's really not knowing yourself, it's knowing
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
I want kids to know who they are.
Hmm.
Eric Little, Chariots of Fire. God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. Like, what are we doing, people? Like, and I know it seems overly simplistic, but we have two questions that I want to be running toward every single day. How do we honor God? How do we do what's best for our kids?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and that does show up in the book and a lot of the questions I ask
Mhm.
throughout it, but those are not complex questions, but we just don't ask
Mhm.
them. We typically say, well, here's what school is supposed to be. And I just think that we need to start saying, I see that. And obviously we live in the world in which we live. I mean, you know, generally speaking, if kids do want to go to college, they're going to need to take the ACT,
Yeah. Hmm.
um, or the SAT, or now even I guess the classical learning test is an option too. I don't want to hamstring our kids. I just think let's look at our education and say, what's a way to set them free a little bit more rather than just saying, here's what it means. Here's what it means to be an educated person.
Mhm.
To me, I don't think we even ask that question. What does it mean to learn?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like we say, well, they learned all these things. I'm like, I don't know that they learned those things. I think you talked about those things in your class. But
Mhm.
learning, to my definition of learning, is that someone will have changed.
Yes, transformation. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just because you memorized stuff that you took a test over and then forgot, which by the way, read any of the science on how people learn. That's like the worst thing to
Mhm.
do to make
Mhm.
kids cram for a test. They're probably not going to learn. Even the secularists say that's not how we learn.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
the whole system, like it's not about learning. It's not about honoring God. It's not about doing what's best for a kid. And once again, these are all well-intended people. Like we're going at it, but we just are so deeply influenced by a system.
Yeah.
I'm like, how about we change that system? Because the founders of the quote American education, look at John Dewey, B.F. Skinner, all these people we call the
Horace
fathers of
Mann.
American
Yeah.
education. Yeah, they were all naturalists.
Hmm.
Like,
The end
and we're
justifies the
still
means.
allowing that model to shape the way we think about school. It's
Yeah.
time for God's people to be what we were always supposed to be in the
Yeah.
world, but not of the world. Let's change it. Let's seek the welfare of the city. Let's be God honoring and not just say it, but let's do it. So I know lots of audaciousness, lots of aspirations, but I don't think that we can wait any longer.
Yeah. Well, Noah, listen, we can keep this conversation going, but I think that is a really good note to end on. One of the things I want to highlight that you said to kind of close our time is just two simple questions that are not complex. What can we do to honor God, and what is best for our kids? Two simple questions, but two questions that require time, space, deep thinking, and we should answer those questions, I believe, according to God's word. Any final thoughts, Noah? Anything that you want to share before we sign off?
Well, let me say this for those of your listeners and whoever that are listening to this and saying, I want to be a part of fixing this. Let's
Mhm.
build a coalition of schools. Let's get together. I think because if you're standing alone as the one school that like we stopped saying college prep. We're calling prep. If you're
Mhm.
a school
Ooh,
that is open to saying let's reimagine this, I think it's a whole lot easier to run in a direction when you have a brother or a sister that's running in that same direction.
yeah.
Um, if you're listening to this, you're kind of saying, okay, I don't. And by the way, people say this to me, Noah, I agree with you. I don't know what to do. Well, let's get together. Like, let's talk about these things. Let's be God's people, and we're communal beings. God built us that way. Let's be hopeful. Let's not just say, well, we can't do this. I think that if God's people in our schools uh, can begin to come together, boy, reach out. Let's start these conversations.
Amen. Amen. Good word, Noah. Well, thank you for joining the podcast. And, as I've said with a number of the folks who've joined the podcast, man, this is only the beginning. So we got to have you back. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper on the trade education part, because that definitely is something that resonates significantly with
Yeah.
me. So, man, God bless you. Thank you so much. So please check out Noah Brink. Follow the work that he's doing with Renew Education. And definitely, hey, listen, if you want to help Noah build this coalition, create this counter-revolutionary gravitas. I just made that up
Yeah.
for world change. Hey, make sure you check them out and just draw from a well of wisdom. Noah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.